Thank you again for tuning into today's webinar, and I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Laura Bryant.
Thank you, Shauna. I appreciate the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning. My name is Laura Bryant. I am the Business Development Manager for Castle Group here in Southwest Florida. And today I have with me Richard DuBose with Godey DuBose & Cross. Thank you, Richard. A little bit about Castle Group, if you're not familiar with us, we are a full-service, full-time on-site property management company. So we specialize in high-rise luxury towers and large-scale amenity-rich associations. If that is you and you're looking for a new management partner, please feel free to reach out to me. Contact information will be at the end of this presentation today. But first and foremost, thank you, Richard, for your time today as we talk about how to run a board meeting effectively. We know it's a pain point. We always get a lot of participation with this educational class, so I know it will be good. But I'd like you to talk about a little bit about your firm and yourself, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. Richard DuBose, Godey DuBose & Cross. Like Castle Group, we're a full-service law firm, but our primary area of practice is representing condominium and homeowner associations. I do want to thank Castle Group for putting on this webinar. They're very good at it. I always enjoy the webinar. We get a lot of participation. I look forward to a good class today.
Okay, let's get going. All right.
Okay, so the goal of this really is to teach you how to run a board meeting effectively, and with the goal being get the board meeting done in an hour. There is a famous board member that I had that was on the board of directors at Bear Stearns. He wasn't the top guy, but he was one of the top guys. And he said their chairman, I forget his name, had an absolute rule. No board meeting goes longer than an hour. And that's kind of the goal I'm trying to help us get to today. Of course, some board meetings will go longer than that for certain circumstances, but generally board meetings that go longer than that, and I've been to many of them, they're not following certain guidelines, and it just turns into a big coffee klatch where everybody in the audience sits around as if they're at the board meeting and just interject all the time. So you really need to do that. So we're going to cover these topics in greater detail, but basically to be effective, you have to have a purpose for the meeting, provide enough notice and the appropriate material so the directors can come prepared, be chaired effectively. This is critical. A strong chair is critical, and we're going to talk about that. Follow proper meeting procedures and respect the time of the board members as they have other things to do. Additionally, have clear supporting documents such as an agenda, minutes, and other reports ready. Ensure all participants have a reasonable voice to express their concerns respectfully. We're going to talk about that. Accomplish the results or have a goal of what you want to accomplish and do that, and then document the board business effectively with the proper minutes. So before we get into those details, let's talk about the legal basics of board meetings in Florida law. And this applies to condominiums under 718, Chapter 718, homeowner associations under 720, and cooperative associations under Chapter 719. Okay, so the first thing is, when does a board meeting occur? This is always a hot topic with people trying to manipulate what is a board meeting, what is not a board meeting. Because when it's a board meeting, you got to follow certain rules, and those rules a lot of boards don't want to follow. So they try to call something, it's not a board meeting, it's a fact-finding mission. It's a pre-board meeting planning session. But the law says a board meeting occurs when a quorum of the board is together and they discuss association matters. So if you have a 3-person board, a quorum is 2. If you have a 5-person board, a quorum is 3. The quorum is a majority of the total board members. If you have a 7-person board, a majority is 4. So in those instances, if you have 2 board members together, 3 together, or 4 together, depending on if you're a 3-person, 5-person, or 7-person board or whatever it is, and you're in real time on a Zoom call like this, on a telephone conference call, all at the same time, or standing around at the pool at the same time. If a quorum of the board is together and you start talking about association business, that is a board meeting, and it has to be properly noticed as a board meeting, and it has to follow the protocols of a board meeting. So boards are always trying to skirt around this and say, well, we were just talking about stuff. We didn't make any motions. It wasn't a board meeting. In my opinion, and in most attorneys' opinions that practice in this area, you don't have to make motions to make it a board meeting. If a quorum of the board is together and they're talking about association business, it's a board meeting. Examples I get all the time are, well, on Friday morning at 10 a.m., we're going to get 3 out of 5 board members. We're going to walk around with the landscaper and we're going to look at the landscaping and make notes and decide what, what the landscaper needs to do better or whatever. So we're not really having a board meeting. Go back to what I said. Is a quorum of the board together in real time? Yep. There's 3 out of 5 of you. Are you talking about association stuff? Yep. Landscaping. That's a board meeting. Has to be properly noticed, has to follow the other protocol. Laura, I know you probably get this a lot where boards are trying to claim it's not a board meeting. How do you generally try to handle that?
Follow their legal advice, whoever's going to have to represent them in court. And making sure the biggest thing is everybody wants transparency. And so sometimes if you have board members, meeting together, potentially illegally, other board members are going to get upset about that too. So, but our best practice is to do exactly what you're saying. And if there's any pushback, we ask them to please get, the legal advice from their specific attorney, because that's who's going to have to defend them in court should
Right.
something come up. We did get a question on,
Sure.
Are there a required amount of board meetings per year?
Well,
Statute.
okay, that's a great question. The answer legally today is no. As of July 1, I actually made a note right here. As of July 1, if the governor signs HB 1021, which is one of the community association laws sitting on his desk waiting to be signed, if he signs that law, then for condominiums only, they've made a change to Chapter 718 for condominiums only. And it's not law yet, and it may not be law, but it probably will be. But as of July 1, if it becomes law, then a condo board that is has more than 10 units in the condominium has to meet one time every quarter. Okay, that means that you've got to meet at least 4 times a year. That will become the law. Secondly, at those quarterly board meetings, you have to allow the owners to ask questions. They can ask questions under the current law. They have their 3 minutes. They can say what they want. What they want to say may be a question. But now the law is going to say the agenda must include on those 4 quarterly board meetings that the owners can ask questions. The interesting thing is, it doesn't say the board has to answer those questions. So that's going to be the new law. And another thing about condo board meetings that will be the new law in July 1 is that if the board is going to approve a contract at that board meeting, you now have to include a copy of the contract with the notice. So those are things that are going to affect board meetings for condos only, Chapter 718, as of July 1. So yes, currently you don't have to meet any particular time unless your governing documents mandated it, but as of July, 4 times a year, once each quarter. But
I've got a couple of questions. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
All right. So Andy asked if we are sharing information and asking for input in an email, is that a board meeting?
Okay. No, boards can, the whole board can be on the email chain and you can talk. You can communicate on email. You can gain consensus. You can debate things. What you can't do on email is vote. It literally says you can talk on email, but you can't vote. And talking on an email, even with 5 of you are on the email out of 5, that's not a board meeting. So email communication is not a board meeting, but you cannot vote.
All right. I'm gonna fire some more questions real quick. Are standing committees subject to the same quorum meeting rules as a board?
Maybe. In a condo, the statute says that all committees meet with the formality of a board, except unless your governing documents say they don't have to, except for 2 types of board committees. A committee that works on the budget and a committee that has final authority to spend money has to meet like a board with notice, open to owners, etc. Unless your governing documents provided, all other committees that don't have those that authority does not have to meet like the board. In an HOA, it's the reverse. In an HOA under 720, the statute says committees do not have to meet like a board at all unless your documents require it, except the ARC committee that makes the final decision or a committee that has final authority to spend money. In an HOA, they also have to meet like a board.
Right. We are firing up some questions. Do you want to keep moving and we'll answer the questions?
Yeah, let's move a little bit because I think we only have an hour and I like the questions. But okay, so who could attend a board meeting? The members of the association can have a legal right to attend the board meeting. No one else has a legal right to attend the board meeting unless they are either holding a power of attorney, proper power of attorney for a member, or if the board wants to grant access to non-members as visitors or guests, they can come. But legally, only owners are entitled to attend. Now, when owners can attend a board meeting, the law says they have the right to speak on any agenda item, and then you can put in reasonable rules about their participation, which are typically you can speak one time on each agenda item. You can speak up to 3 minutes. You can't assign your time to someone else so that they can speak longer. Those are the typical rules for board meetings. Okay. When can a board have a closed meeting? That's typically called an executive session. There are really only 2 times. The statute doesn't really say emergency. I'll explain that in a minute. But the board can notice the board meeting, but prevent owners from attending when they're meeting with their lawyer to discuss attorney-client privilege matters related to proposed or pending litigation. Somebody's going to sue you. You're going to sue somebody. Somebody's threatened to sue you. You're in a lawsuit. You're talking to your lawyer about that lawsuit. You can meet in an executive session closed. Secondly, the board can meet without the lawyer present to discuss a personnel matter. Law doesn't define what a personnel matter is, but in our opinion, it certainly would include any employee of yours. If you literally have an employee, they're your personnel. The question I always get is, does that include the manager like Castle Group? If you have Castle Group as your manager and the on-site manager and the company, are they your personnel? While they're literally not your employee, they're a contracted vendor. In my opinion, and in most attorneys' opinion, they are considered personnel for the personnel matter exclusion. They're basically what's called a co-employment situation, because while you don't employ them directly, you do direct their daily activities, what their hours are, et cetera. So if you want to meet in a closed board meeting to discuss something of a sensitive nature regarding your management company, you can do so without letting owners attend. People always want to try to expand the personnel matter exclusion to say, well, we're going to go out and interview new landscapers, so we want to close the board meeting as a personnel matter exclusion. I don't believe that's proper. Most attorneys do not. So it's related to your employee or your management company or your manager. The third category, in an emergency, the statute doesn't literally say you can meet in a closed session in an emergency. So it really shouldn't be on this slide, but what the statute says is if it's in a statutorily defined emergency, you can meet, have a board meeting with less than the proper notice normally required under emergency situations. But it has to be an emergency declared by the state or the local municipality. I get the question all the time, we have to have a board meeting today without proper notice because it's an emergency. So I say, well, what's the emergency? And they say, well, Director Smith's going on a 3-week cruise to Italy. Everybody goes to Italy these days. And he leaves tomorrow morning and we have to have a board meeting. It's an emergency. I say that's not an emergency. It's not under the statute. And I know Laura's heard this before. In the industry, we say an emergency, if it doesn't deal with fire, flood, or blood, it's not an emergency. So you can't use the cloak of an emergency because of just inconvenience. So what is proper notice for a board meeting? Regular board meetings require 48-hour single posted notice with an agenda. That's all that's required. You post it somewhere on the property that you've identified in advance as where you put notices. 48 hours in advance, single posted notice. You don't have to email it to everybody. You don't have to, you do have to put it on your website if you have a website requirement. And currently condos with 150 or more units have to have a website. As of July 1, if the laws pass, that now is going to be reduced to condominiums with 25 or more units have to have a website, and HOAs with 100 or more parcels, I believe, will also have to have a website. So if you're required to have a website, there are requirements to also post the notice on the website. So most board meetings you have are regular board meetings, okay? Then there's what are called special board meetings. Special board meetings require 14 days mailed and posted notice. A special board meeting occurs, number one, when you adopt a special assessment. Number two, when you're adopting a rule that affects the use of the home or the parcel, such as quiet hours. Three, if you're adopting a resolution to approve electronic voting, that has to be done in a special board meeting. And in a condominium and a co-op, I'm not sure about the co-op, but definitely in a condominium under Chapter 718, when you meet to adopt the budget, you have to do it at a special board meeting, 14 days mailed and posted notice with a copy of the budget included. In an HOA, the statute does not require the budget to be adopted at a special board meeting, but sometimes your governing documents do, so you better check. Additionally, An agenda is required. HOAs up until last year didn't have to have an agenda for their board meeting. It just say, we're having a board meeting, here's the date, time, and place. Now, just like condos, co-ops, HOAs have to have an agenda. So you have to identify the business items that you're going to address, pets, parking, and leasing, whatever it is, you have to identify that on the agenda for it to be a properly noticed board meeting. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of this. So meeting purpose. Okay, the usual purposes of meetings, as you obviously know, is make decisions. Okay, that's the main purpose. You're supposed to be doing, that's the primary purpose of a board meeting. It's for a board to formally get together as required by law to vote to do something. Okay, we're going to vote to paint the clubhouse blue. So you have to do that at a properly noticed board meeting. Okay, oftentimes it's to adopt a resolution on a policy, a board participation policy, an official records request policy, whatever it might be. You meet to solve problems. We've got an issue upcoming. We have to meet to discuss it. You don't necessarily have to vote on it. Maybe you just want to discuss the problem. So you do that at a board meeting, but you could do it via email, but you can't vote on it. Plan and evaluate, adopt the budget, whatever it might be for the future, and inform the owners, maybe bring them up to date on certain things. Let me tell you this. Don't have a board meeting if there's nothing to do, okay? Even though your board meeting is regularly set for the third Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m., if there's really none of these things that you need to do, you don't have the board meeting. You're not required to have the board meeting except as of July 1, once a quarter for condos. So if there's nothing to be done, don't have the board meeting just to have it, unless you just want to have the owners come so that you can have input, which is often valuable to have kind of an update. What are your thoughts from the owners? But unfortunately, and I know Laura can attest to this, a lot of times just having a board meeting, it just turns into, with no purpose, it just turns into a bash the board session from the owners that want to come and in a public forum tell you how horrible you are. But if there's no reason to have the board meeting, don't have it. Okay, so meeting preparation. The role of planning and preparing for a board meeting is usually falls in two ways. A lot of boards are hands off. They just tell the manager, hey, we need to have a board meeting and discuss these things. Or the manager will tell them, it's time to have a board meeting because we got to adopt the budget. We got to decide on this contract. We got to direct the attorney to file a lawsuit against Mr. Johnson, whose dog is barking constantly, whatever it is. So a lot of times boards let the managers kind of dictate that, or sometimes chair people are more hands-on and they really want to control, the board meeting. And so they direct the manager. Whatever works for you is fine. Mm-hmm. Laura, I don't know if you see any particular one way or the other these days.
Yeah, it's usually, the standard, board meeting agenda, and then the manager will add their notes on new business, old business, and then send it to the president for review. And then the president will usually send it out to the rest of the board members to see if there's anything else that needs to be added.
Okay. Yep. Okay, the key to preparation. Everyone should be clear about the role they play and what needs to be done prior to the meeting. So number one, adequate notice must be provided to the board members in a format that's been previously agreed upon. This kind of goes where Laura kind of mentioned you have a board packet. Oftentimes the protocol is to have a board packet that's going to include the agenda, the notice, and everything related to the agenda. For example, a copy of the contract or a copy of the lawyer's letter or whatever it might be. But you need to make sure the board members have this information in advance, because and we're going to talk about this more. One of the number one things is, they hand out the board meeting packet as they're walking in the door for the board meeting. So none of the board members have really had a chance to review it and come prepared. Now, I know good management companies like Castle get the packet out to them in time, but as we'll talk about in later slides, sometimes boards members don't read it until the day they walk in anyway. But you really need to have a format, maybe 3 days prior, 4 days prior, whatever it might be. You need to have format that's regularly followed so that the board can be prepared. Again, of course, obviously, all documents needed prior to the meeting should be distributed to the members of the board. Okay, effective chairing. This is a key part here. Having a strong chair is critical to a board meeting, and that might be not the president's forte. The president may be a great leader, may be a great forward thinker, a good consensus builder, and all of that, but maybe they don't have a strong, will at a board meeting. I'm not saying they have to be a dictator at a board meeting, but you need a chairperson that knows the agenda and will keep things moving and keep them within. I hate these new corporate speak words, but they do make sense. Keep people, in their lane, or keep them within the guardrails, and don't let them stray off. Board meetings get out of control with a weak chair that lets the board members themselves and the owners just go off on tangents of stuff that's not relative. You've got to keep them. Let's get back to the focus of what the meeting is. Oftentimes, I'm asked to chair certain meetings of a special nature. Oftentimes, what I see and often works well is let the manager chair the board meeting. I can guarantee you that manager's been to a lot more board meetings than you have probably, and a good manager has developed a skill set of keeping a board meeting moving, because they don't want to be there any longer than you want to be there. The lawyer certainly is getting paid, but in this day and age, I got a lot of work to do, and I don't want to sit at a 4-hour board meeting talking about mulch. Okay. So one of the key things you can do that another manager pointed out to me, when you put out the agenda, put a time limit on each item. Now, that's not an absolute, but, call the meeting to order, proof of notice, establish a quorum, 1 minute. Okay. Reading approval of new minutes or old board meeting minutes, 2 minutes. Okay. And then as you get into the substantive discussions, put a timeline on it. 10 minutes to talk about dogs, 5 minutes to talk about parking, 20 minutes to talk about this big topic, and use that and point to it as you're getting close to the time that is up. The chair can say, look, we got to move on. We got 10 more minutes on this subject. So keep people moving on that. Let everybody have a reasonable amount of time to talk, but don't let your board members or your homeowners go off on a tangent or a rant. The biggest mistake I see is letting the members. You need to set the ground rules up front, have them in writing already, so that the members that attend the meeting to watch the board do their work know what the rules are. And those rules need to be, maybe you sign up at the beginning of the meeting to talk, you have 3 minutes, and you don't let them interject willy-nilly as they want. That gets the meeting to become chaotic. It gets out of control. They say something, someone across the room doesn't agree and says you're stupid, and it goes into chaos. The chair has to keep that membership group strictly controlled. And I've seen forceful chairs say, Joe, sit down. It's not your time to speak. You will have an opportunity to speak. It's not yet. We're moving on. And then have a particular time when the owners get to say their piece. It could either be at the front of the meeting, or it could be as each agenda item comes up before you vote, you ask the audience. The third way I've seen it done is you put it at the very end of the meeting. So the owners have the right to talk on the agenda when the agenda has been run through and already voted on. That's not really fair. I don't really recommend that. I like to see it done at the front of the meeting or as the agenda item comes up, but don't let them just interject. That turns a 1-hour board meeting into 3 hours, because it's as if there's 30 board members sitting there instead of 5, because you're letting the audience participate as if they're part of the board, which they're not. So that's very, very important. Any comments on that, Laura?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you that speaking after the agenda item, because the membership then gets to hear the board have discussion first, and that can sometimes answer a lot of questions or concerns. And when owners are signing in, as they come into the meeting, they're signing up for a specific agenda item that they want to speak on. Right. So that when that list of owners is taken to the table by the manager, we can call those unit owners up by name and agenda topic. Once the board's discussed that topic, everybody can speak and have their voice heard, and then the board can make their decision.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So during the meetings, the chair should encourage participation by all board members. I've seen it then where they just go around. Does anybody have anything to say? Jim, Bob, Sam, Susie? So they feel like they do have an opportunity. Allow all views to be heard within reason, and ensure members understand the discussion and the terms of the issue by asking for clarification. And particularly the motion. Oftentimes you state the motion that's being discussed, and then you're going to vote, but it's a good practice to maybe restate the motion so
Mhm.
everybody clearly understands what they're voting. Okay, summarize the discussions before moving on. That's kind of what I just talked about.
Yeah.
Keep the meeting on schedule by adhering to the agenda and keeping board members on topic. That goes right back to the strong chair. Okay. Also, 6, we just talked about, keep the audience member input strictly controlled. Those are the 2 main things to keep your meeting moving.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about putting a timeline on each agenda topic, it really just sets up the expectation for everyone in attendance. And you're right, it's not a black or white stop time, but it gives we're not going to spend an hour talking about this one agenda item. We're going to give it 15 minutes because we've done our due diligence, right, prior to coming to the meeting.
Right. Okay, manage the conflicts. This is the role of the chair. Ensure decisions are made clearly and explicitly by vote so that there's no room for misunderstanding or misinterpretation. That's key. It's going to go to the part on minutes. The statutes say the vote of each director shall be recorded in the minutes. In my opinion, that means literally the vote of each director. It should not be 3-2 motion passed, because guess what? If 3-2 the motion passes, and later, whatever that decision was turns out to be a bad decision, everyone will claim they were the 2 that voted no, okay? Which isn't mathematically possible. But you should say, Susan, how do you vote? John, how do you vote? And record it so that you know in the minutes, in the future, from the past, that this is how everybody voted, okay? So there's no misunderstanding or misinterpretation. And read or call motions or call votes on the issue. Ensure the votes are counted and recorded in the minutes. We kind of discussed that. Ensure that the minutes reflect the proper attendance, votes recorded. This is what I just talked about.
Yeah.
Okay, this last part is also kind of goes to the minutes. The minutes, the joke in the industry is they're called minutes, not hours, for a reason. Meeting minutes of the board, even if the board is recording the meeting, we do not recommend, and most attorneys do not recommend, that the meeting minutes reflect a verbatim recitation of every word spoken from the opening of the meeting to the closing of the meeting. First of all, your minutes become 10, 12, 13 pages long, number 1. Number 2, if that's in your minutes, it is a playground for lawyers that want to dig into the past of the association and claim something wasn't right based on all the words that are in those minutes. So in our opinion, the minutes should simply reflect the true business of the board. It should reflect when the meeting was called to order, that a quorum was established, who was there to establish the quorum, proof of notice, every motion that was made, who made it, what it was, who seconded the motion, and then the vote. As far as the discussion of the board, if you want to put a couple of sentences to give a flavor of what the discussion was, you can do that. You're not required to do that. And the more you put in there, the easier it's going to be for people to look back historically and make something out of nothing. Okay. So don't load your minutes up with every word. If you record your meeting, our recommendation is record the meeting for the purpose of later preparing the minutes. And once those minutes have been prepared and approved at the next board meeting, destroy the recording. That's perfectly legal. If you keep that recording, it is an official record that owners can come and get, and now they have a live version of everything that happened. So the standard practice is to either not record your meeting or only record it for the purpose of preparing the minutes. Laura, what do you see as the most common practice with your folks?
I know that a lot of associations will record and then post the meetings online. I don't, honestly, since I'm out of the operations a little bit here. I'm not sure exactly how all of our associations are moving forward, or which way they're going as far as keeping them long term.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, starting on time while everyone has responsibility for ensuring this happens, reading material. Okay, this goes to board members need to come prepared. Okay. If you've got a board member, and you probably know who that is in your community or on your board, that constantly shows up at the meeting not having read anything, and then wants to sit there during the board meeting and go through everything that they've had 3 or 4 days to read, you don't have to honor that person. You don't have to go with that. You either come to the meeting prepared and be able to vote. And if you can't vote because you're not prepared, then you should vote no. Okay. But you can't, the board members have to understand they have a job to do. and it's disrespectful to the other board members. And while you might accommodate them occasionally, if that board member constantly shows up unprepared or late, and there's not a good excuse for being late, here's the worst thing I see. The board meeting starts, I'm there, we're all there, there's one board member missing, that person shows up 20 minutes later, and we have to go back to the beginning and go over everything we just did just because that person was late, okay? You're not required to do it unless there's a good reason for them being late. Frankly, I wouldn't accommodate that kind of behavior. It's disrespectful to you and everyone else. Obviously, if they have a good reason, you should, their car got a flat tire. I get that, but we all know the type of person I'm talking about. So meeting procedures and quorum, okay? Here's the basic ABCs of running a meeting. You call the meeting to order, you establish that there's a quorum, you establish proof of notice. We've talked about that. You review the agenda. You might, like Laura said, you might say, note, folks, the agenda has time limits on it. We're going to stick to those time limits, so respect them. Review and approve the minutes from the previous meeting. One thing you can do here, this is another thing that I have a pet peeve with. The minutes are usually contained in the board packet, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to read them. If you read them and come prepared for the board meeting and you have a problem with the minutes, then you can speak up and say, well, I don't think that was correct. That's fine. I don't like it when they say, well, I'm going to read the minutes. So now we're going to read the 5 pages of meeting minutes that have been in the board packet because nobody read them. So I like the chair to say, look, unless there's any objection, I'm going to make a motion that the minutes be approved as presented. Second, all those in favor say aye, et cetera, et cetera. If someone has a problem that, hey, it says we voted on this, we didn't, we tabled that, then go ahead and say it then. But you're not obligated to read the minutes front to back before you approve them. That's not required. It's a waste of time unless there's a special circumstances. Call for a motion, second, discussion, and vote. This is number 6. This is the proper way for a board to do proper official board business. There's a motion. There's a second. There's an opportunity for discussion amongst the board. Then typically that's the opportunity for the homeowners to discuss that agenda item, and then you vote. Now, I know Robert's Rules of Order, and there are people that are very technical with Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order does say, first of all, Robert's Rules of Order is not law, okay? Most documents will say it's a guide or it's a resource for you. Robert's Rules of Order does say that for small assemblies, like small boards of 3 or 5, you don't necessarily need a second for a motion. I know that's in Robert's Rules of Order. I think that's bad form. That's bad practice. I believe the way you should do it is a motion, a second, discussion, vote. If there's a motion and no second, there is no discussion, there is no vote, and the minutes should reflect that motion died for lack of a second. That's the proper order. And if this isn't properly noted in the minutes, later on when something goes bad and a lawyer looks at those minutes, they'll say, look, you guys did all this, but I don't see any motion where you did that. Where was the board meeting then? Let me give you a classic example. When the board has the authority to approve or disapprove a sale or lease application based on a background check or something like that, almost inevitably, the governing documents will say the board can approve the sale or the lease based on this criteria, okay? It says the board has to approve it. Sometimes it'll say the board can delegate that authority to like the manager or someone else, but if it doesn't say that, it says the board has to approve it. Well, decisions of the board are made at board meetings. So I know the common practice in the industry is when the board is presented with a lease or sale application and the manager says it meets all our criteria, this is okay. The board via email, illegally, but nobody cares, says, yes, we approve, or yes, that's okay, we approve that. Have they properly approved that sale or lease? No, they have not. They should do it at a proper board meeting. But in reality, and I'm not telling you to do this, but I'm telling you, in reality, nobody cares because that everybody's happy. The seller sold his property. The buyer got to buy. The lessee got to rent. Everybody's happy. Nobody cares if it technically wasn't done right because everybody got what they wanted, okay? That's kind of like no harm, no foul. Not proper, but nobody cares. Conversely, when the board is going to deny that sale or lease, you're going to have some upset people. I didn't get to sell my property. I didn't get to move in to what I thought was my new home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're going to deny a sale or a lease, you better do it at a properly noticed board meeting with a motion, a second, and a vote. Why? When they hire the lawyer to challenge what you did, that lawyer's going to ask for two things right off the bat. Oh, you didn't, I see you have the right to deny the lease. I see that you denied the lease with a letter that said your lease is denied. I note that your documents say the board has the authority to do that. Please provide me with the notice of the meeting where the agenda item said approval or consideration of lease for unit 21, and show me the meeting minutes where there was a motion, a second, and a vote denying that lease. And oh, by the way, if you can't provide that, your documents also provide that if you don't do one or the other within a certain period of time, usually 20 or 30 days, the application is automatically approved. You can't prove to me that you did it. It's been more than 20 days. My client gets to sell their property, or the felon that you thought you denied gets to move in under the lease. So when you're denying a sale or a lease, you better do it by the book, okay? Finally, there's an adjournment. Now note, a board meeting, owners have the right to attend and speak on all agenda items. The agenda is not required to have a common thing that it does have, which is open forum, public comment, owner comment, where it's just a broad category that basically says the owners can use their 3 minutes to talk on anything they want, even if it's not on the agenda. That's an okay thing to have. It's healthy for good communities to get input on various topics that the board should hear about at board meetings. But if that's being abused, you do not have to have on your board meeting agenda open forum for anything that they want to talk about. You can stick to the agenda items. The law says they have the right to speak on all agenda items. If the agenda is pets and parking and it's not open forum and they want to stand up and talk about bushes, you can say, we're not talking about bushes. It's not on the agenda. Sit down. Okay. So you don't have to let them talk on everything out of the world unless it's an open forum on your agenda. If that's getting abused, remove it. Finally, there's adjournment. That's the basics of a board meeting.
Great question. Once an agenda is posted, are you able to amend that agenda at the start of the meeting?
Good question. I believe the statute says that, and I believe it says emergency, or it may not, but I think it says you can add to the agenda with a 2/3 vote of the board. So it's a super majority vote of the board to add something to the agenda that was not on there within the proper time. But I got to go back and check. I think that's under emergency circumstances, but it may not be. But that's a great question. I'll try to write about it in the newspaper because I should know the answer to that, but I don't.
And you do write often in the newspaper, the Naples?
Naples, Fort Myers, and the Treasure Coast, which is up around Stewart and Jupiter and places. So several of our attorneys write in those papers. A Sunday column on, Ask the Attorney kind of thing.
All right, great. So that's everybody look there too.
Okay, agendas and reports. This is another area. One of the best ways to hold an effective meeting is to put thought into the agenda, distribute it prior to the meeting, and then stick closely to it. We've kind of talked about that. So ideally, the agenda should must note the topics that are to be covered. Action required. Like one of the agenda items might be discuss. We're not going to vote on this. We're only going to discuss the appropriate color for the clubhouse. Or you can literally say we're going to vote on this item. So you can show what the action expected of the board is to be. Okay. And then we already talked about this, a timeline associated with each item. We talked about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great to have, whether it's going to be discussion or voted on. When I was on site, you recommended that, and that helped a lot because the owners realized, do I want to show up because they're voting on it, or are they just going to talk about this? And we've been talking about the same topic for a while. So it is helpful. Okay.
Some organizations, in keeping their governance structure, have standing items that appear on the agenda, such as a report from the governance or landscaping committee. Yeah, you can do that. If it's helpful and informative to keep the community going, that's a typical thing. I often see treasurer's report is a common thing on the agenda, where they'll talk about the highlights of the matter. Here's another thing. These committees and the treasurers, they're very proud of the work they do, and they should be, particularly landscaping or whatever. And people that are on a particular committee, that because that's kind of their passion. I find this to be particularly occurs on the landscaping committee. There are people that are really into gardening and landscaping. Okay, so they love to be on the landscaping committee. They do a great job. Okay, and they want to write a report at for what they did, showing everything they've done, and that's great. Okay, I think that's great. But they want to then stand up at the meeting and read their 4-page report. Sometimes I've seen it done with slides showing, we planted petunias this year over next to the swimming pool, and they'll show a picture. Last year we had pansies, but now we decided to go with begonias. And they'll go into great detail because they're very passionate about the topic that they're on the committee for. But you don't have to sit there and let them read the whole report. Particularly at annual board meetings, where the annual meeting, this can go on and on and on, where for the last year, they detail everything that they've done down to the minutia. Okay. If you like that, that's fine, but you're going to find that it takes up a lot of time at the board meeting, and it creates a lot of questions from the owners, and it can just become into a long, tedious, inefficient way to run a board meeting. So what I recommend is, if they have their report, then they deliver the report to the board. It becomes an official record. It can go into the minutes as being attached as the report for the landscaping committee, but don't read the whole report. Okay. You can if you want to, but I find that takes up a lot of time. If they want to hit the highlights, one or two of the most, biggest things they did that year or in the last month, that's fine. But you don't need to go into such detail. In fact, I remember going to one annual meeting that I've gone to regularly for years and years and years and years. And they had a long-term project that they were going to make the community gated, a large community. They were going to put walls and gates around the entire community. So this took years to accomplish. A lot of other neighborhoods involved. And for years, we would go to the meeting, and the chair, who was really good at this project, he was really, really into it, would start at the beginning of the history of the project. And so every year we would hear everything that for the last 5 years has gone on, rather than just an update of where we've gone. And while, it's interesting, it just took up a lot of time to go back to, 2018, we started this, to consider that. That's just a recommendation. Okay, so like we said, include the reports in the packages, hit the highlights, have the directors read it before the meeting. If they have questions, they can ask, but you don't have to read the whole report. Allow the members to obtain the report if they want more detail. Don't go into it. We just covered all this.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to jump ahead because I know what's coming. So the chair can acknowledge the report, ask if anybody has any further discussions or questions. Here's another thing I see a lot. The chair will ask any comments on that. And you take a 2-beat pause. 1, 2, hearing no comments, we're moving on. When you ask the audience for comments, there's always a hesitancy of the first person to raise their hand. Okay. But once they do, everybody feels comfortable now, so they want to talk too, either because what that guy just said was stupid or whatever. So what I try to encourage is, don't beg the people to talk. You say, are there any comments or questions about the report? Hearing none, we're moving on. Because once you open the floodgates, you're off to 10, 20 more minutes, because now everybody feels like, well, I get it. I'm going to talk too. And I didn't like, so you don't have to beg them to comment. Okay. And keep it moving.
Yep.
The same can apply to correspondence. Many organizations get a lot of communication from owners. You don't have to read all that at the board meeting. A lot of times boards want to read the crazy letter from the crazy owner just to kind of embarrass them or something. That's really not effective. They want that letter to be read so that they can be proud of what they said. So if you get stuff from owners, it's not required to bring it up at the board meeting. It's an official record. Anybody can look at it later if they want to. But if it's really not conductive or part of what you're trying to do at that board meeting today, or whenever it is, you don't have to go into, well, we received 6 letters last week about the flowers, and here's what, you don't have to go into all that. It's really, unnecessary. Okay, effective participation. We probably covered some of this, but all members have the right all members of a board have a responsibility to ensure the effectiveness of the meeting. It means it's not just the chairman, everybody has a duty to kind of follow the rules and keep things moving. I mean, it's a whole board job, not just the chairman. This includes active participation, but also, again, we've talked about this. As a board member, arrive on time, stay for the duration of the meeting, read the materials prior and be prepared to discuss it. Be respectful. Don't be interrupting the other board member. I mean, I know Laura's been to these board meetings. I've been to them where it looks embarrassing for a board to sit in front of the homeowners and bicker at each other and pout like little children and to get mad. One of the biggest problems I've seen in the last 10 years, and I guess I attribute it to the rise of social media and just the general uncivil discourse that goes on in our society today. In the old days, you disagreed with somebody, okay. These days, you disagree with somebody, I see boards have a tendency to go to war against each other. If the vote was 3-2 and you're on the losing end, the other two board members go to war against the three by going on social media, calling the other board members names and threatening bad language and all kinds of, false accusations. And they think that they're really supporting their cause. I can tell you, most homeowners look at that as, look at our stupid board that's in chaos. I mean, keep your dirty laundry to yourself, okay? You can disagree, you can have private conversations, but going on social media to try to embarrass or defeat the proper action of a majority of the board is it just doesn't, it's not conducive to anything except making your members think that you're out of control, chaotic, they don't trust you, and it just is so unproductive. I know every board member here today on this call knows exactly what I'm talking about. I get the call almost once a week, probably twice a week, that so-and-so is on social media saying all of this stuff. Make them stop. I can't make them stop. They rarely have they ever actually defamed you. Okay, that's rare. Disagreeing with you, calling you stupid, saying you're just dumb and you make bad decisions, that goes with the territory of being a board member. You're basically a politician in your community. There are people that are going to love you. There are people that are going to hate you. If you don't have a thick enough skin, don't go crying to the attorney to write a letter to say, stop being mean. Ignore the people, do the business you're there to do. Don't respond and react, because that's exactly what they want. And you're right back into the cycle of doing it. So, and if you on the losing side of the board decision, try to convince your board members with rational, thoughts and ideas. And if you lost and you made a fair fight of it, you lost. Okay. Don't go to war and try to screw everything up. Move on to the next one, and maybe you'll be on the winning side of that issue. But it's just disruptive to the board. It makes board meetings long. It makes you look really unprofessional in front of your homeowners.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's the professionalism. And I think most boards you're running multi-million-dollar, $500,000 organizations. They're non-for-profit, and it doesn't come across professional when there's that type of behavior on social media.
Right.
You want a united front.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Ask for clarification before voting if you're not sure. Carefully word the motions. Allow owners to speak. Basically, we talked about this on the agenda upon it. Have a written policy of when they can speak so they know the rules up front. The number one thing, one of the key importance of the policy is, and I've seen this done, where they allow owners to assign their 3 minutes to somebody else. So then the guy walks in with 20 minutes and he says, I can speak for 20 minutes. That should be number one in your policy. You cannot assign your time to someone else so that they can filibuster the board meeting. Okay, meeting. Another thing is, and I very quickly, I see board members try to encourage it. I see it at local city council meetings, but it doesn't really work, but you should try. And you see it a lot if you watch the Florida House of Representatives or the Florida Senate when they're doing their job. If you agree with the person stood up and said, I think it's a bad idea that you're thinking about doing this, when the agenda item's up, you're encouraging the board to vote against it. You're a homeowner. It's your time to speak. You say, I think you should not vote for that, and here's why. And then there's a line of 15 people behind him that are going to stand up and use their 3 minutes to say the exact same thing. Okay. That's totally unnecessary. The way it's done in the House of Representatives and other places, if you support what that speaker said, you're in agreement with the speaker encouraging the board to vote no, then have the homeowner, or if you're a homeowner, stand up and say, I stand in support of what Mr. Johnson said. That's all you need to say. You don't have to say, Mr. Johnson said, blah, 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 and I agree with all that. So try to encourage the homeowners to say, look, if you're supportive of what a prior speaker has said, and you want to acknowledge to us that you're in support of that, feel free to stand up and say, I support what Mr. Johnson said, but you don't have to go into all the same reasons why Mr. Johnson did that. If you can get your owners to do that, it'll move things along a lot faster. Okay, this is the last part, then we'll take some questions. This is a manual that apparently was a declassified federal document called Simple Sabotage Field Manual, which was put out by the precursor to the CIA, developed in World War II. It's intended to give everyday people instructions on how to help the Allied forces by reducing the production in Axis nations. Basically, how the population that is being dominated by the invaders that are trying to run their own government there. How does the actual the average homeowner that lived there or person that lived there, what can they subtly do to screw up the machinations of government when the government is being run by an outside invader? So this is just interesting because you'll see some of these things done by people in your own community. So we'll go through these quickly and then take some questions. This is often done by board members. Okay, a board member that wants to slow down the train that he or she is on the losing side of 4-1, they want to slow it down. They will use these techniques. Okay, make speeches, talk as frequently as possible at great length, illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. I know you all have a board member that says, well, let me tell you how we did it up north. There was this time, and they go on for 20 minutes and, cut them off. You're the chair, cut them off. Even though it's a board member, it's not relevant. That board member is simply trying, in a lot of cases, to slow down the train that they don't want to see leave the station because they don't like where it's going. Number 2, interrupt others frequently with off-topic matters. You see this all the time. There's the bully board member that won't shut up and wait his time. A strong chair, again, is important in this case. Also, let me just say, with the advent after COVID, Zoom has become a very common way to have board meetings and annual meetings. And while it's very helpful for people to attend, it's also helpful because it has its own share tools that you can cut people off on Zoom. Just click them. Your 3 minutes is up. We're muting you. Okay. So Zoom board meetings can be very helpful to control the out of control audience that used to show up, in person. So use that technology. If you're finding that people aren't following the rules and they're on Zoom, you can mute them, let them keep hearing you, but they can't talk. Number 3, when possible, refer all matters to the committee for further study. Attempt to make the committee as large as possible, never less than 5. Okay, you've all seen this. Laura has heard me talk on this topic before. This is a classic example that our own government uses all the time. When there is a controversial topic that the present powers that be want to look like they're doing something on, but they don't want to really do anything, whatever the topic is. If I describe this, you're going to remember a time that this happened. And it typically starts with the president saying something like, well, we recognize the problem. So I have appointed a blue ribbon panel. They always use that blue ribbon panel of America's foremost business leaders. And he goes down the resume of 39 CEOs of America's foremost companies to create this blue ribbon panel that is going to study this matter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And you might hear about the blue ribbon panel one more time. And 3 years later, nothing's been done. There's a 90-page report that's buried in the annals of the archives of the Congress. Everybody's moved on. They forgot about the blue ribbon panel. And the president or whoever got what they wanted because nothing happened. Okay. So referring matters to committees for further study and making the committee huge I call it death by committee. nothing is going to get done. And maybe that's the goal. But if that's not the goal of the board, the minority board member that suggests this, don't let them use that to stymie what you really want to do. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. You know that type of person. We've talked about that before. Haggle over the precise wording of the communications in the minutes, resolutions when the majority believes it's clear. I mean, this goes back to, President Clinton. What's the definition of is? So they just, is that an Oxford comma in the proper place in the minutes? I mean, if 4 out of 5 of you clearly know what this means, don't let the English technician try to derail you with parsing language. Okay, if you all figured it out, then that's a technique just to slow things down. Number 7 or number 6, refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting to attempt to reopen the question. We know this type of person that wants to go back over old ground. Robert's Rules of Order actually says that if you're on the losing side of a motion, you basically can't reintroduce that motion. You have to have someone that was on the winning side of the motion to reintroduce it, to revisit it. It might not be an exact recitation of what Robert's Rule said, but it's basically that if you've lost the last motion, you can't reintroduce it. You have to get someone that was on the winning side to convince them to reintroduce the motion to reopen it up. So don't let board members try to go back to reopen discussion on topics that have been decided and the majority of your board does not have any interest in talking about it anymore. Don't let them do that. Okay, and finally, this is another one, scare tactics. I get this all the time. The board member that is, look, nobody wants to get sued, okay? And no, even as lawyers make money defending and prosecuting lawsuits, we don't like lawsuits either, okay? First of all, as a not-for-profit corporation board member, you have to basically steal money or take an unjust benefit or self-deal to be literally individually in trouble for things you do on the board. So don't let the scare tactic of the board member that says, we're all going to get sued, okay? You might get sued, but the suit isn't going to be against you individually. It's not going to go anywhere as long as you haven't stolen money, as long as you've acted in the best interest of the community with the proper advice from lawyers or CPAs or other professionals that are authorized to give you advice on that topic. So, this threat of a lawsuit, whether from the board member themselves or the owners, I don't want to make any decisions because we might be sued. Okay. As the saying goes in America, anybody can sue anybody for anything. Okay. So 99% of the time, the people that threaten a lawsuit, they never do anything about it. So don't let this threat of a lawsuit mean you shouldn't do what a majority of your board knows to be a proper action that needs to be taken and that your professionals, your lawyers, CPAs, whatever, have told you is lawful and, is a proper thing to do. So with that, we've got a few minutes left. We'll take some questions.
Right. Let me, first and foremost, for everybody, we will be sending out a copy of today's presentation and a link to this Resume recording so you guys can watch it again and listen to Richard's comments. Let's go back to the questions. This was back to what's in regarding quorums. It's a 4-member board. How can they meet as a board if they want to discuss items if it's only 4 people? I'm assuming they're trying to find somebody to fill a spot as well.
Well, if it's really a 5-member board, but there's an empty spot, your quorum is 3. So 2 of you can meet, okay? And you're not having a board meeting because you're not a quorum. If your board literally was set at 4 in the bylaws, that is the number, then a quorum of that would be 3. So again, 2 of you could meet. You're not having a board meeting. It's less than a quorum. You can meet all day long and it's not a board meeting.
Right. This isn't regarding fining committees and how to properly impose fines. So should the board at an open board meeting levy fines before the hearing of the fine review committee?
Yeah, fining is complicated because the statutes are not real clear. They've been made a little clearer, but in my opinion, the proper protocol for a fine is the board has a properly noticed 48-hour posted notice board meeting with an agenda item saying fine of unit 21, whatever, something so that the unit owner knows they're the topic of that agenda item, okay? Then the board should make a motion, a second, and vote to impose the fine with the amount of the fine or the length of the suspension, identifying the rule that was being violated and what the person did. If the person's there, they can use their 3 minutes to try to convince the board not to do it. Once the board votes to impose the fine, the law now says you must provide them a hearing before a fining committee with at least 14 days notice. The former law said you provide them with an opportunity for a hearing. So that was confusing. Does that mean we have to offer you a hearing? If you don't ask for it, we don't have to give it to you. That's all gone now. The law says you must provide them a hearing. So you give them 14 days notice of a hearing, date, time, and place, what the rule was, what the penalty proposed is. We recommend giving them 20 days notice. If they call to ask for a rescheduling, we recommend you accommodate them at least one time. It looks better in front of a judge that you accommodated their schedule. You reset the hearing, you hold the hearing, the committee votes majority up or majority down to support the penalty imposed by the board. That's the best.
Thank you. All right, Brian asked, is Zoom required? If Zoom fails, must the meeting be terminated? And should Zoom be required in the bylaws?
Great question. Zoom is not required. Okay. It's almost become an expected requirement of your owners because we're all addicted to Zoom. But the law does not say you must offer a Zoom or similar type platform for any type of meeting. There is no requirement to do that currently, and I don't think there will be. Should your bylaws mandate Zoom? You know, I don't know. I think that could have some good and some bad. You want owner participation, but you know, that would be up to you to decide.
Can you ban a disruptive person from the meeting, a live meeting, and only allow them to Zoom in?
Yeah. Well, that's a technique that we've recently believe is available to you. You're allowed to suspend use rights of owners. If you hold your board meetings in the clubhouse, the law also says owners have a right to attend the board meeting and they have a right to use the clubhouse because they're paying for it too. It's common element, common area, whatever. Okay. So the question is a good one. What we feel is proper is if the person comes to the meeting physically, constantly, raised as hell, doesn't follow the decorum rules, and you need to have rules in place. That's about 3 minutes. You got to be respectful, all of that. If they violate those rules, I do believe you can have a board meeting, suspend their right to attend the meeting physically, and relegate them to attending via Zoom, where you can control them. That way, you're balancing the law that says they have the right to attend the meeting with the law that says you have the right to suspend their right to enter the common amenities. I think that's, has a court ever determined on that? No, that I know of, but I believe that's a reasonable way to do it. And you should have a policy that indicates that's what will be done if you violate the rules.
Let's see here. Do board meetings need to be offered via Zoom? Or, okay, we already answered that one. Patricia was asking if townhomes are included in these requirements for board meetings, but townhomes, you're going to be statute 718, 720, right?
Yeah, that's funny. I go to these seminars and they say, how many people are in condos? How many people are in HOAs? How many people don't know? And then someone will eventually say, well, we're in a villa or we're in a townhome. That's a real estate term. Okay. It doesn't tell me if you're a condo or an HOA. You can have townhomes that are under 720. You can have townhomes that are under 718, and you could have a townhome that's under 719 cooperative. So that doesn't dictate. But if you're under any of those three statutes, when almost inevitably you will be, most of what we just said applies identically to you.
Correct. Donald said, you said only members can attend board meetings. What about a spouse of a married couple who is not an owner on the deed?
Technically, if they don't meet the definition of a member, which is almost always member equals record title owner, i.e. name is on the deed. If that's not the case, you could legally prohibit the spouse from attending. Now, if they're not raising hell and they're not, a problem, I wouldn't enforce that even if you could. If it becomes a problem, yeah, then enforce it.
All right, James asked, I recently received a message that implied it is not a good idea to allow your CAM to take minutes for a board of directors meeting. Do you concur? Why or why not?
No, I think standard practice is the CAM does take the minutes, even though the
That's how-
secretary technically is supposed to do it. The
Mhm.
CAM almost always takes the minutes. I don't think that's a bad practice at all, as long as they're doing a competent job.
Michael asked, under the new law, does a condo association have to have a separate website from the HOA? I'm assuming if this is a master HOA with a sub-association as a condo.
Yeah, the Condo Act says condos of 150 or more units have to have a website. That's being reduced to 25 or more units. It would be its own separate website from the master website. And the HOA statute, as of July 1, if it becomes law, HOAs with 100 or more parcels have to have their own website. They would be separate websites.
I've got a question. Our HOA claimed that they did not need an agenda or post notice for our annual meeting because it was not a board meeting. What is
Okay.
the
Yeah.
distinction that allows
yeah.
them to not post?
Yeah, okay. You know, I've been to thousands of annual meetings. The annual meeting is a membership meeting. It's the annual once a year meeting where the members get together and vote on things that the members vote on, like waiving reserves or amending documents or electing directors, whatever it might be. But in practical terms, you go to that meeting and the board is sitting at the front of the meeting, all 5 of them, they're sitting and they run the meeting as if it's a big board meeting. So technically, I guess properly, you would notice it as both a board meeting and a membership meeting. But I know it's not done that way. As far as the agenda goes, the statute, oftentimes your bylaws, almost always, your bylaws will have a section on the annual meeting and it'll say the annual meeting agenda is as follows. And you have to follow that to the letter, not necessarily, but you do have to have an agenda for your membership meeting, in my opinion, not because the law says it, but because almost always the bylaws say it.
Yeah. All right. I know we're 6 minutes over, so I'm just trying to, you've answered a lot of these along the way. So if you didn't get your answers, and Richard, I want to respect your time.
Sure.
So we had lots of questions coming in. But
Yeah,
it looks like
you
some
should
are,
email down here, info@gadclog.com.
Yep.
You can send your questions in there. If they're good questions without identifying you, they might end up in the paper. If they're very, very detailed, respectfully, you know, if I'm not your legal counsel, I can't really give you legal advice. And in fact, I should have given this disclaimer up front. What we talked about today is general information. It's not specific legal advice to your particular community, because I don't know your particular community, but it is the general overview. So a couple more questions. Laura's fine with me.
okay. I will grab a couple here towards the bottom. Let's see, if a board member's term has expired and no one submitted credentials to be voted on to fill the term, can the board nominate a new board member?
That's a tricky question, because a lot of bylaws say a board member's term is 1 year and ends at the annual meeting or until the position is otherwise filled. And that has been interpreted in some instances to mean that the board member rolls over. But I would say if there was a seat available on the board, it was Mr. Johnson's seat. He didn't ask to renew he didn't put his name in to be a candidate to be reelected, and no one else did. In my opinion, you've created a vacancy on the board that needs to be filled according to your bylaws and the law.
All right, thank you. I've got lots of questions. Can you only require a board meeting to be in person and not offer Zoom, or?
Yeah, in the old days, pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, you know, board meetings were physically at a location, which they still, I think we can end on this question because this is a big one. So you have to have a physical location for the board meeting. Even in my opinion, even with Zoom, it has to have a physical location, because it's no different than back in the 90s, in early 2000s, when we didn't really have Zoom. The law said board members can attend board meetings on a speakerphone that's at the physical location, as long as it's a speakerphone and everybody physically at the meeting can hear the board member. And you could literally have all 5 board members on a speakerphone that's at Laura's office in their conference room with a bunch of homeowners sitting around it. Mm-hmm. Were you required back then to allow the homeowners to also call in on that speakerphone line? No, you were not. It's the same with Zoom today. You're not required to allow the members the homeowners to attend the meetings on Zoom. You could simply, and you still have to have a physical location. So in the example I gave, instead of a speakerphone sitting in Laura's conference room, it would be a computer or a big TV with a computer cast to it. That is the Zoom platform, and the board members would be there. And if you want to attend the meeting, they could tell you, you have to attend physically. We're not allowing homeowners to log in to the Zoom platform. That's absolutely legal. Have you created a bunch of Zoom junkies, myself included, that if you start doing that after you've allowed it for 2 or 3 years now, will you get a lot of pushback from homeowners? Probably, but that's legal. You don't have, but the thing I get all the time is, can we have a pure Zoom meeting with no physical location? In my opinion, the answer is no, because if I'm a person that doesn't have technology, doesn't like technology, doesn't use technology, doesn't understand technology, I have a right to attend the board meeting, and I go to Laura's office, sit there, and I look at a TV with the Zoom platform on it. So you still have to have a physical location.
Richard, thank you so much. Thanks for
Sure.
going over time a little bit here. Again, as Richard stated, if you have further questions, whether it's for myself or Richard, you've got our emails on the screen, the info at GoD and DeBose and crosslaw.com and then info at castlegroup.com. So thank you, Richard. Again, it was a great discussion. I appreciate you and your
Thanks,
time.
Laura. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.